I would like to welcome Daniel to the stage.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here in this museum, and you're so lucky to live in this fantastic place. It's really a paradise, and every time I come here, I'm so jealous. The language of architecture. I believe that architecture is not just about the obvious things, materials, and its power of construction, but that it is a language that communicates. And without communication, there would be no architecture. And architecture doesn't just communicate to the mind, it's also to the emotions, to the heart, to the soul. It's very similar to music, and I was once a virtuoso musician, and I see the very, very close relationship between architecture and music, because both of them really are highly scientific, very, very precise disciplines, but at the same time, it's not just about the technique, but what they say to our hearts. So without further ado, let me start with my first project, because I was a late bloomer to architecture. My first project, I won a competition in 1989, before Germany was unified, and it was a project that really talked about not just the city, but about humanity. What does history really mean? And I drew this plan. This is a plan of the city of Berlin, with my building sort of in the center. You see this white line, which is the wall. 1989, the wall still ran through Berlin. But I thought that when it came to Jewish culture, the Jews, to what happened, to the murder and extermination of Jews, and also the future of the city, the political divisions of Berlin had nothing to do with it. It's about the city of Berlin, what happened in Germany, what happened in Europe during those dark times. And I drew this emblem, and I wanted to make this emblem shine in the city, not just with the irretrievable fatality of the past, but also with the future, with the new future. So there is the building, and in addition to the Baroque building, you can see that two buildings stand in a very special relationship. The Baroque building, very famous Baroque building in Germany. There is the museum. You see the garden, a kind of a square, and the Holocaust Tower. So it's a very, very special design that speaks about a history that is complex, that is tragic, but it also is in a new city. And where is the project based on? It's not really based just on the ground that you see on Lindenstrasse in this Baroque center of Berlin. It's based really on those who are not there, those who are exterminated. It's the ground of people. And those names are really infinite. If you really read the Gedenkbuch, the book of memory, which I worked with, it represents thousands and hundreds of thousands, and I cannot say the millions that I could read, but it's a project that evoked many para-architectural ideas in my work, because I wanted to complete, for example, an opera of Schoenberg, Aaron Schoenberg, after he came to the United States, kicked out of Berlin because he was a Jew, he was composing contemporary music, and he never completed the opera that he wrote in Berlin, called Moses and Aaron. I highly recommend you get the recording, because it's not completable. There is a aporia where Moses speaks to Aaron and says, what can I hear from God now? And I thought it cannot be complete musically. I agreed with Schoenberg, but it could be completed in the echoes of the footsteps of the visitors, and also to open up the world of this one-way street. This is a famous text about Berlin. Famous Berliner Walter Benjamin wrote this one-way street. And I wanted to say, it's not a one-way street. We're living in another time. We have to open it. So from the sketch to the actual building, and you can see that the building is contemporary. It doesn't mimic the Baroque. It stands next to it. It doesn't have an obvious relationship, but the context is always more complex than it appears to the eye. And when you stand in the courtyard, when you look at the scale of the building, the materiality of the building, you see really the organization of the building. And the building has three kind of tripartite structure. On the bottom is the underground, a kind of a labyrinth of three different roads, one leading to the dead end. There's nothing more to be said. It's the end of Berlin as we have known it. The end of that Berlin, it's over. It's the Holocaust, it's the extermination. A second road leads to the Garden of Exile, that dotted line to that square, the garden. And another road leads you to the staircase that takes you to the continuity across the abyss of that history. In the center of the building runs the void. It's an emptiness. It's an absence of space. It's not an atrium. It's not something you walk into. It's just an echoing space that reverberates with what is not there. And then, of course, the building itself has a massive volume as well. And you enter the Baroque building, and there's a cut in the Baroque building. And I thought you should enter through the Baroque building, not through a visible bridge between the two buildings, because the history of Jews in Germany is also during the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, we celebrate Moses Mendelssohn and Lessing and Hegel and all the great thinkers that were in Berlin. But at the height of the Enlightenment, there was a darkness. There was anti-Semitism. There was the rejection of Jews. And I thought that's really one of the ways to encounter it, through the underground. And by the way, Jewish cemeteries were used for construction of the subways in Germany during that horrific time. So you enter this underground, and you have different roads that intersect in not very obvious ways. The plane rises, and you enter, for example, the Holocaust Tower. It's an empty space. It's not really a normal museum space. It's not heated in the winter. It's not cooled in the summer. It doesn't have any objects of art. It's just an emptiness. And it's an emptiness with, at the end, a light, a very sharp light at the very tip of that volume. Because I thought, there's nothing more to be said except there must be some light. Otherwise, we would not have history moving on. There would be nothing to be said about humanity after these events. But that tip of light is really what the place is about. And when you enter it, you can hear the echoes of the school children just beyond the school. You're cut off. It's an experience. I cannot put it in words, but that's also why architecture is there, because architecture is not words. It is volumes. It is temperature. It is echo. It is light. It is material. It is really the human body implicated in the events of the experience. Then there's the garden, as I mentioned, that road to the exile, because it's not only the exile of Berliners from Berlin or Jews from Berlin, it's the exile of Berlin from itself. Berlin is in exile. And this garden has these 7 times 7 columns, 49 columns. The central one is filled with the earth of Jerusalem, of Israel. 1948, the foundation of the State of Israel, with the earth of Berlin. And it's on a tilted plane. It's kind of like a boat, being on a boat. You see the city differently when you enter there. It's a physical space. The columns are at right angles, but at oblique angles. So you've got a bit of that sense of displacement which you are in. And then the main stair that continues to the galleries and the museum itself across this abyss. As you see, the museum doesn't have normal windows. It's really this topographical star that I showed you, which connects streets, addresses, names, which is really projected into the building. And you see across through the exhibits to an address that might not really be in the city anymore, but is there even more so by its erasure. And the void, which runs, as I said, throughout the entire space itself, reverberating with that sound and connecting the different spaces of the museum across itself. It's a space of absence. And the museum is not only about presence, but what is not there, which is the spiritual carriers of that great history of Berlin, which is not only Albert Einstein and Schoenberg and Lieberman and Max Reinhardt, but it's all the working people who worked to create that capital, that state, that Germany, that Europe, who were murdered. And then the building, the star, which is in this metallic glazed building with its cuts. And then I was lucky to be able to create, some years later, because originally there was no program for people getting socially together. They didn't know how many people would even come to this building. I'm really glad that it's actually one of the most visited museums in Germany, even though it doesn't have any Chagalls or masterpieces. It has really the fragments of that history. But later on, they asked me to do a space for dinners, for celebrations, for bar mitzvahs, for meetings. Last time I was in Berlin, there was the meeting of the German general staff, the army, the generals of the federal army, of Navy, the admirals were meeting with all their communities in the building and having a dinner. So it's a very important, and I based it on a kind of sukkah. It's Sukkot in the Jewish calendar. It's a building with nature. And it's a place for performances. It's an acoustical space. It's a courtyard, but it's something very special and very much moving the museum forward into the 21st century. And of course, the museum is not a big building. It's just a building, but even a limited building can change what a city is, how people view that city. And it's not filled just with tourists. It's filled with Germans, with people from Europe who come to this museum to learn something about that time, to move forward in a different way, to understand something, to not be just oblivious to the past, but be actively engaged in a better future. I was also able to build across the street, very recently completed, the Jewish Museum Academy, there are thousands of people interested in what happened to families, to places. So there's thousands of people come to research. There are archives in the buildings. There is a library in the building. It's an old flower market. So it's a very humble sort of these crates of wood which have been placed in the building. And by the way, I was able to place a work of art of my own, which the museum agreed to. It's this quotation by Maimonides, written about 1,000 years ago, which says, "Hear the truth, whoever speaks it." It was written in Judeo-Arabic, in Arabic. I also have it in German and in English. And it's fantastic because it's in a Turkish neighborhood. You know, Berlin is a very diverse city. We have to understand that these issues are also contemporary and move us on. There's a garden within the flower market, old building, and of course a connection to the museum. And the visitors are increasing. It's interesting. A topic that many thought would just fizzle out because it's old, we know about the millions, but who can understand it really? It will grow in the future, and the awareness also will grow. Now, very often I'm asked, where was I on September 11, 2001? And this is a very strange kind of anniversary coincidence. On September 10th, 2011, there was a private kind of opening of the museum with the Chancellor of Germany, President of Germany, Henry Kissinger, famous politicians, ambassadors, luminaries of America, of the world, of Germany. A kind of celebration. The opening was to be September 11th for the public in the evening. But the building never opened because the attacks in New York created an uncertainty. And the building remained closed for the next 3 days. And I thought, you know, history is a strange thing. It's not something predictable. What a strange coincidence that on the day when I thought, now I don't have to think about history because people can enter the building and think about that history themselves, the building remained closed. So I thought about it a lot. At that very moment, I decided I'm going back to New York. You know, I grew up in the Bronx. I'm going back to New York. I didn't really know what, but I wanted to go not just back to New York, to Lower Manhattan. And how strange that I wound up winning the competition for Ground Zero. It's very strange because originally I was called by the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation to become a juror of the competition. And I thought it was such an incredible honor that I was thrilled. I ran around saying, wow, I'll be a juror on this incredible And then I had a conflict. I had a large lecture that I couldn't reschedule. I said, can I come at 10 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock in the morning to this first jury meeting? And I said, no, you can't. If you cannot appear at 9 o'clock in the morning at One Liberty Plaza, you cannot be on the jury. And I was very, very crestfallen. And as I was putting the telephone down, the secretary on the other line said, well, Mr. Libeskind, if you can't be on the jury, you can certainly compete in the competition, which I did. There is one of my initial drawings. You know, what is it about? It's a 16-acre site. It's not a big site. It's full of millions of square feet of density, 10 million square feet of density of office space, of transportation, of culture. But what is it? It's not just a piece of real estate. And I have to say that my colleagues, all my friends in the company, proposed large megastructure in the center of the site where the building stood. I thought nothing should be built where the building stood because it's really a sacred place. It's a place where people perished. It should become something memorable and keep the buildings really on the outside, on the periphery, emblematically, really echoing the torch of liberty, which I love, and of course going all the way down to the bedrock as well. So it's not just a two-dimensional site with development, but really a fully three-dimensional site from the bedrock to the heights of the Freedom Tower. I show this not out of vanity, but to say how many stakeholders there are in this project. We've got the families of the victims, in the thousands and thousands, people who lost their brothers, mothers, aunts, children. We've got the Port Authority of New York, which owns the land and leases the land to private architects and their own private developers and their architects. Port Authority, of course, is run by two governors, the governor of New York and New Jersey, because it's between the two. The streets are responsibility of New York City. The mayor of New York is responsible for the streets. The MTA, the subway system, is running underground, and the PETH trains are also part of. So it has many stakeholders, and the art of the project in a democracy is how to bring consensus to people who initially might have very, very different ideas about what to do and how to develop the site. This is from the competition. You can see the buildings descending. I distributed the density of the 10 million to as many buildings as I could, not into one or two big statements. Make the buildings lower, make them safer, make the streets more interesting, and create a central public space. That's my sketch on the left. That's one of the latest renderings on the right. And really, there's something really thrilling to be able to go from a drawing through such a complex process, and I guarantee that is the most difficult process anybody could even imagine, because, you know, New York is New York. It's got a lot of smart people. It's a lot of powerful people, a lot of money, a lot of ambition, all the things that make for struggles about ideas. And there it is. That really, you know, it's a marathon. It's not a short, you know, it's not a making a drawing and then go and relax. It's fighting for what you believe. It's working with everybody. And I found something really inspiring here, that only through that kind of process you can reach something which is not just imposed and built, but something that really resonates in this incredible site, which, as I said, is not a big site. But just to give you an example, this site of 16 acres, here is Hudson River on the left. You have the Broadway on the right. This small site has the density, if you took what is being built in the site, of a downtown of a complete American city. Take Denver, Baltimore, any American. That's how much is in there, three-dimensionally, in terms of quantity, in terms of volume, in terms of complexity. So it's a real city. But the city is not only what you see over the ground. The true art is what's underground, because we've got 75 feet underground to the bedrock. There's infrastructure, trains running. By the way, the PETH trains were running almost immediately after the disaster, because you have, you know, people have to work. People have to continue being involved in the successes of New York and of America. So that's really one of the challenges, what to do, how to deal with it. And of course, the slurry wall. That's something we should have never seen, because that was exposed in the attacks. That's the foundation that supports the site. And I have to tell you, this is a little anecdote, but I think it's important to me. I was at One Liberty Plaza, which overlooks the site, with all the finalist architects, the 7 other architects. And it was a rainy day, miserable, dark, threatening, with gray skies of New York. And someone said, does anybody want to go to the site? And everybody was leaning out of the window saying, no, it's much better to see the site from the air, because you can see everything. But something moved me, and Nina and I went down to the site. And really, I can only tell you my life changed. When you walk down that 75-foot ramp and hit that ground, and you realize that you're not just standing on something secular. You're in a place of tragedy, but also in a place that has this incredible wall that is a dam. You know, on the other side, it's the Hudson River. It's a huge dam. So it marks a moment of construction, a moment of place, a moment of time, something that I thought is irreplaceable and should be part of the visitor's experience. Now, the visitor's center is really where you see those mega columns of the World Trade Center. You descend down into the museum underground, and the slurry wall is part of that, and it's a vast, very moving. I highly recommend, really, there are many, of course, people involved, many architects in the whole project, but it's a very moving museum. It's a tribute, really, not just to the tragedy, but also to the attitudes of heroes, really, who on that day, normal people saved other people, and hundreds of firemen died, policemen, but what a moving tribute. So that's really the full scope. You're not just on the streets, you're also in the full three-dimensional sense of place, which can never be shown just on television or read in a book. It's visceral. And it's visceral, as, of course, are the footprints, which come all the way down to the kind of bedrock. You can see them from the bottom. I thought that was very important to really create a public space, a memorable space. And by the way, it's about a balance between memory and the future, because it's difficult. How do you balance so that you don't make New York, the happiest city in the world, as far as I'm concerned, something of pessimism, to put a dark light? So I thought of inspiration, create that public space. I had the waterfalls in my original master plan. They were highly criticized by the tabloids. People said, no, Niagara Falls, who needs it in New York? But we need it. We need to counter the hardscape, to create nature, and to screen acoustically the very busy streets of Lower Manhattan. So Michael Arras Memorial is a very beautiful tribute in that sense. And it's really, there are millions of people who have come here, 20 million already. And it's still a construction site. And the museum just opened in May. We have more than 1 million people who have visited the museum. So it's a magnet. People want to be part, understand that story, because that story, as I often say, you know, there are political and military answers to that story, but architects can only do it something positive. That's the nature of architecture, to construct something, to build something for the future. I created an additional public space because I never think there's enough space in Lower Manhattan for people. So, you know, tall buildings, shadows, a lot of density, the wedge of light, and it's an additional entrance from Broadway, from the east side, where a lot of people will be coming, determined by the marks of the attack. 8:46 a.m. when the first tower was struck, 10:28, the center dramatic skylight of the Pet Terminal by Calatrava. So there is the shadows and the light. So it's a memorial. It's a memorial in light, and it was a beautiful day in September. And the buildings stand, even though they're within the grid, their height and their disposition echoes, I think, will be, when you see all the towers, a kind of a torch around the central flame of the memorial. And there it is. You know, it's really already out of date. You can see already the wedge of light here, the building tower number 2, which is just under construction. You see the station with the central skylight representing the southern edge. You see the Freedom Tower, tower number 1. You see tower number 3 under construction. Tower number 4 is finished. It's a work in progress. The memorial is finished. The museum is finished. There's a lot of work to be done, but it is an ongoing engagement, and that's what cities are. That's what cities inspire. And you know, I really started here where I encountered New York, and I was a teenager. I was 13 years old when I came to New York without the language. My parents worked in the factories. We came off a boat, and I was glad I came on a boat because I saw New York from that vantage point of the millions of immigrants. And that's what I thought. New York is unfathomable because the creativity of America stands not just for its material wealth, but its liberties, its freedoms. It's something that is the most precious thing about why I love America. So that's the project. Now a very different project in Milan, Italy. This is another beautiful place. It's a historical city, center of design, of art, of economic development. Beautiful city with its Duomo, with its beautiful Renaissance castles. I had a chance to do a master plan and work here to create a completely new 21st century piece of Milan, because the grounds are really the grounds of the old fairgrounds, built in the 1920s, 1930s, which had all the fairs. They moved out to the suburbs, and this land became available. And I'm one of the architects of the Central Tower. But it's not just about the tower, it's also about residential living. It's about creating a piazza, creating green space. It's really a rebirth of an incredible city in which Bramante worked, in which Raphael worked, in which Leonardo da Vinci worked. So how do you connect this texture of a great city that has, you know, seen the origins of Christianity? You know, that was the Edict of Milan created it, to create something that is sympathetic to the history, that is deeply embedded in the history, but also offers something new in terms of living, so again, high density, buildings that are higher in scale, have their own structure, create a green space, which is badly needed in all cities, and create buildings that are, of course, economically viable, but expressive in their sense, in their structure, in their terracing, in their screening. So it's a vibrant, new, really sense of a city. And I always think cities are in competition with each other, wherever they are. Villages are in competition with each other. Farms are in competition with each other, because the world is always dynamically moving forward. So this was really a project that we loved working on. It's really a departure, but it's part of the history of a city that has always had different histories throughout, and always with a very high aspect of architecture, because it's a city where people are aware of architecture, are aware of design, and it has to really work with new floor plates, with new sense of light, with new dimensions of what the city really is, and with also new views. You know, you get a spectacular views of the city. So it's a project that, as you can see, has to touch base with traditional architecture, pick up the scale from the traditional architecture, but move forward as well. And it's a project that has really launched a new Milan, which is moving forward. A very different part of the world, in Singapore, one of the most interesting, most affluent, most beautiful cities in Asia. Very small, but really progressive and highly ambitious. we were able to win a competition to build on Keppel Bay. This is an old industrial area. And the buildings of my client, Keppel Corp, one of the largest companies in Singapore, built this domino, that's their previous project. Very much like a cookie cutter project, but we thought, no, you should create a necklace of parks, create something that really adds something new to this very, very beautiful city. And there are low buildings, which are from 7 to 15 stories high, but also, and I want to tell you the story of these high-rises, because, of course, the original planning permission was only for about half the height. But I thought, no, this is a place that should be marked, and not just to build iconic architecture for no reason at all, but because when you build high density and tall, you can save the greenery and open the space that is so badly needed, especially in a country that is itself small and developing rapidly. So these are doubly curved towers. It's not just a facade. The towers themselves are curved, and they contain lower buildings, higher buildings. It's really creating individuality and uniqueness for each of the units, and that's really the art of it. You have high-density environment, but you want each person to love where they live, to love their apartment, and also people on the streets to be able to share in the public spaces, the clubhouses, the park, the ambience that one is creating, which is certainly a 21st century ambience. It's not the old ambience of the colonial Singapore. So that is a development which is, I'm very proud. It was the most profitable and most quickly sold and bought development. And there's so many great architects working in Singapore. If you look it up on the Google, everybody's working in Singapore. But again, to make something successful, you have to offer something new. You have to do something iconic. You have to do something that is sustainable. And look how much greenery, this small space, we were able to give back to the public. And I think that's the art. It's not some trick for authorities to permit taller buildings. It's really how to create a 21st century city. And I'm very proud that this development is very popular. People love living in it. And it certainly is redefining this other part of Singapore, which was really a very neglected part, underused and underutilized in terms of what it was. Boca Raton, that's why I'm here. As I said, you live in a paradise. Thank you. You really live in a paradise. I don't have to tell you because my sister lives in Florida, and I've been here many, many times, and I've always admired how incredible this part of the world is. Not just its natural beauty, not just its flora and fauna, but really the people, the creativity. I created this kind of a project with Elad. And by the way, I want to say something at Elad Properties. I'm not plugging here my client, but it's a client that I worked with in New York, who cares about architecture, cares about not just the bottom line, but cares to contribute something important in a project. So boldness is something I've always loved. Clients in the public and public authorities, because you have to be bold. We live in a bold time. So here it is. You know where we are. We are at Boca Raton. We are right on the lake at the resort and country club, and we are on Mizner Boulevard. And by the way, Mizner, in his time, was a forward-looking person, very much so. He created the park. He was interested in living. And how do you take that tradition to the present? How do you pass it on, not just use it up? So there is the site, and as you know, that site now has buildings, low buildings, occupied. It's all hardscape. It's all parking. It's not in my view, a well-utilized site. It's completely just a block. So to create just 4 buildings, open the site, make it permeable. Of course, the buildings have to be tall, and I think it's good to be tall because when you're tall, you can create, as you saw both in Milan and Singapore, that open space that the public can enjoy. And you can take this density, sort of cutting into this open space, and create something really very attractive, which is, by the way, sensitive also to where it is. It's not the first tall building. There's the condominium. There is the club building itself. So the context is dynamic. The context is never a dead context. And I want to give you this little anecdote, which you will laugh because I think it's very funny but very perceptive. You probably have been to the Metropolitan Museum and have seen the famous painting by Picasso of Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein was the great patron, the poet, the great writer, also patron of modern art. And when Picasso finished, I read this is true. When Picasso finished a portrait that is now in the Metropolitan, Gertrude Stein said to him, you know, I like it. It's a nice painting, but it doesn't look like me. And he said those unforgettable words, don't worry, it will. and certainly, that's Gertrude Stein. We don't know any, forget the photo, that's Gertrude Stein. So that's about the context, about transformation. By the way, they are large buildings, but we've created this park, which is really, I think, an amenity that will really be enjoyed by the public and fit into the context of the downtown, of the scales, and of the living possibilities in this beautiful place. So there is a kind of bird's eye view. You can see the towers are different heights. They have green crowns. They're shaped in a very, very specific way, creating something that I think will be an attraction in the downtown for, raise really the bar for development, you know, raise the shopping, raise the values. I mean, that's what a good project could do. It raises the standard of everything, which means the urban life, the recreational life, people who live there, people who come there, who enjoy doing things 24/7. Here is a sketch of the buildings. So they are very unique buildings. They're not from somewhere else. They grow out of this particular ground. And I never design a building without being to the site many times, looking at it, thinking about it, speaking to people, and just walking the streets, listening to the ocean, listening to the golf balls. There it is. The variety of and I understand that every city has a kind of a set standard height, but that's not necessarily good for a city. It's like, a crew-cut haircut, which is militaristic. You need a variety in the skyline because that's what makes a city interesting. That's what makes it vivid and creates kind of a sense of space and a scale of certain grandeur to the public space. Now, we took a lot of time to create really a large park, which I think will be very beautiful. This is represented in a model, which I think you can see later. But the park itself is meant to be an attraction. And, it's not about how tall a building is. Sometimes people say, how tall is the building? As if we start with the height. We never start with the height. We start with what is the possibility of the site. And I just want to tell you, if you were to take the number of apartments and spread them, you'd have a 20-block development. So the future of cities depends on kind of smart design in terms of what you give to the public, what the public can enjoy, sculptures, gazebos, clubhouses, cafes. This part of really vivifying the street and creating, I think, bold buildings which have a new geometry. And by the way, the geometry is kind of rippled like the water. The buildings break up the scale of the building, so you'll see always a different light on the building. It's not like a slab building. They're economic buildings, but they are really articulated in a very, very architectural manner. And I think this will be a site which is really beautiful in Boca Raton. Thank you. Thank you.